Good morning, everybody. You are listening to Dennis from Awakening Health again. And I've got Shay Ryan Douglas with me this morning. He's been on my radio show already once before, but he is going to be talking about something that is very, very underrated today, a movie that's premiering. And he is doing a lot of work in promoting that premiere of that movie. Just for those who don't know Shay, he has a little bit of a history in relation to being in movies himself. He's put together a platform called Earth Heroes TV, and he is an incredible interviewer who's hosted a range of people about topics that relate to the environment, health, politics, and generally things that are going on around the world that people have to be very, very concerned about. So, welcome to Awakening in Health again, Shay, and let us know what is this movie about?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dennis. I really appreciate you inviting me on to speak once again on the radio with you. Last time we had a great conversation. Highly recommend anyone to go back and have a listen to that one as well. But today I'm really excited to drop in. As you mentioned, I was actually featured on a Netflix documentary, and then that inspired me to go on and create two of my own documentaries as a creative director. And what I've really started to realize is the power of visual storytelling. And that's what we're going to look at today through this new film that's coming out from phenomenal, world-class, very professional filmmakers in the United States, going by the name of Mikki Willis, who has now been working tirelessly over the last 3 years to help shed light on the circumstances and the situation that we find ourselves in today, so that people can become aware of our current circumstances and be empowered to make wise choices to move and navigate through this, some could say, quite challenging times, quite chaotic times that we find ourselves in. And if you don't know what I'm talking to, Dennis and I generally talk around, particularly on the Awakening in Health channel, on primarily health and well-being. Now, a lot of people, we have to realize that the economy and wealth is generally one of the main stresses for human beings in the world today. Because if you don't have money, you don't have a place to live and food on your table, and it can be extremely stressful for many people, particularly when central banks raise their interest rates, and they just pass that on to the people on the ground like you and I, and that can become very dreadfully stressful. And a lot of people go through a lot of suffering. It's been said that the Australian Tax Office, the ATO, is one of the primary causes of a lot of suicides in this nation. So we've got to look at all angles here, and there isn't just one answer solution. This is a multifaceted, multidimensional plane that we find ourselves in. And when we're looking at, personal health and well-being that impacts everybody on this planet and probably listening into this call, we've got to look at all areas at this moment. So I'm really excited to open up this conversation, particularly around this new film, The Great Awakening. And so, yeah, thanks, Dennis, for having me on.
Absolute pleasure. What you said there, I think, is very important, Shay, that sometimes these oblique topics that I talk about on my radio station, so things like the cashless society, 15-minute cities, people might really think, what's that got to do with health? And as you rightly mentioned, these things have everything to do with health. Even more dramatically, if we have people who we love, who are hurt, who are injured around us, those things affect our health in relation to stress, let alone the impact on victims directly. And this opens the door for what could be quite a disturbing conversation, unfortunately, and the premise of this movie called The Great Awakening. So if you could just put into context slightly a little bit about what, I guess, inspired Mr. Willis to embark on this journey of making the film.
Ultimately, The Great Awakening is the third installment of the Plandemic series by Mikki Willis and his team. And if you haven't seen the first two, I highly recommend go to earthheroestv.com or the Plandemic series.com, where you can get a glimpse into part 1 and part 2, which were released in the height of the lockdown period. and really shed a light on, what's going on in the world right now. It was the most viewed by millions of people in the short time that it was released, and instantly banned and censored on every platform imaginable. Again, the Plandemic Series 1, which was released in the peak of the lockdowns, was watched by millions of people and then censored and shut down. Now, that is hosted on Earth Heroes TV, as well as other great independent media platforms like the Freedom Network, as well as the plandemicseries.com. But the Great Awakening is the third part in that series. So what this film really looks at is it really peels back the layers of the corruption on a political level and unveils the path towards a brighter future, which is a key piece in all of this, because as we become more aware of the circumstances of our political state governance, where we start to realize and start to question, are we truly living in a democratic government system? And, we often like to rest in the certainty that, yes, they have our best interest at heart. But this film begins to unwrap and uncover some of the truths behind these agendas that have been in place for a number of years now. This is not something that they've just decided in the last couple of years, but something that has been in plan and in place for a number of years. And there's a lot of evidence to support this. And the film, again, does a phenomenal job in highlighting how this system may or may not be, I'll let you decide for yourself, have your best interest at heart. And so the Great Awakening film is ultimately intended to be this kind of guiding lighthouse to help us get out of the storm that we find ourselves in and look to a brighter future. It's a beautifully well-created film. There's some extremely well informed and incredibly well articulate and as well very intelligent people who feature in this film, such as the likes of Dr. David Martin, and many other great speakers, from the gentleman, forgotten his name, but he's a hilarious comedian. JP Sears is one, as well as the gentleman from, having a mind blank, but he's what I can say is that there's a lot of great credible speakers who share in this movie that were interviewed. And so highly recommend for you guys to go and check it out for yourself. If you like, what we might do at another time, I know this is a radio show, but ultimately I'd love to show you guys the trailer, as it really starts to highlight how ridiculous the last couple of years really have been and what people have been up to. They really start to creatively, through an artistic lens, highlight how silly we actually really looked as a human species on this planet, and how convinced we have been to comply to authority and do as we're told, just as we were little children in school, once again, as we were being conditioned and indoctrinated into these systems that strangle and control us to be obedient and follow the rules.
That's always the quandary, isn't it? When I first got to Australia, it was a very kind of laid back country, and a country that really didn't take direction. And we saw that through different wars, the kind of laid back and casualness towards authority, which the Australian people were really inbuilt with. So for me, this compliance that's happened over the last 3-4 years has been astonishing to actually see. And you covered a lot of great points there, but a lot of people don't realize that even the beginning of the educational system was kind of started by, I think it was either Friedrich the Great, maybe from Russia. And his manual, I guess, set out how schools should be formed. And in his manuals, he's saying that we do not need children to be creative and thinking. We need them to be in factory type settings where we have a supervisor at the end of the room, and we have a bell to control their behavior when they have to get up and get down. And this is very clear in his writings. And that system was adopted by England in the late 1800s to early 1900s. And really, we have got the, I guess, the platform set for trying to ruin creative thinking, critical thinking, and have a society that is compliant. I'm talking to Shay Ryan Douglas from Earth Heroes TV this morning, a movie producer in his own right, who is helping shed some light and some attention on another movie by somebody called Mikki Willis, a movie which is part 3 of a series, and this one is called The Great Awakening. And the movie really, we've just discussed so far, shines a light on the compliance of people around the world in the last 3 years. And just before the break, we kind of left off with this seemingly absence of critical thinking that happened in the last 3 words. So I think we're going to jump right back into that section there with Shay. And so, Shay, give me an example of what you mean by how stupid the world looked.
It's a great question, Dennis. Thanks for asking. And ultimately, here we are in Australia right now, and we're sitting fairly comfortable, I would say, in some respects, where the majority of people are going back to life as normal, where going back to work, doing as we're told, life's cracking on. Although we are seeing crazy amounts of inflation and interest rates in the banks going up, that may begin to invite people to ask questions for themselves around the current systems of control. However, what the film highlights is that even in countries like Australia and particularly Canada, over the last 2 years have highlighted and really invited us to ask those deeper questions. Are we truly living in a democratic country? When we were led to believe that it was us, we the people in the commonwealth of these nations, had a voice to say and direct the decision-making process of this country, we quickly found out, particularly in Canada, when we looked at the trucker movement, which was widely censored, there was thousands and thousands and thousands upon people who wanted to make their voices heard through peaceful protest, very peaceful, simply blocking the roads, and they were given the hard end of the stick, where the government decided to not only block, ban, censor, shut them down, but also freeze their bank accounts. So what we're seeing here is the weaponization. Again, this is the Canadian government in the last couple of years, democratic government, weaponize, people's financial bank accounts by putting a pause on anyone who participated in a peaceful protest as people were beginning to ask questions. Now, we're using that as an example in the film. We can really start to ask those deeper questions, particularly in these Commonwealth countries like Canada, like Australia, like the United States, and really begin to ask who is actually in these positions of control and power, and really making these bigger calls at very important periods in time. And so the film highlights this, and it's very interesting, and it starts to open up a lot of little wormholes to go down.
Interesting stuff. I just had a Dr. Karen Ben on the program fairly recently discussing how sinister this move towards a cashless society is. And when I wouldn't surprise me that a lot of people listening wouldn't even know that there was a huge march of truckers in Canada a couple of years ago protesting about the draconian rules that were getting enforced. And as you quite rightly said, they found themselves unable to access their own money in their own bank accounts. Some of them even had their money taken out of the bank account. Now, the point that just throws up there is that if they didn't have any other method of payment, so in other words, if they didn't have cash lying around, all of a sudden you can't even access food. You can't put fuel into your truck to continue your sustenance and continue your living. So the ramifications of, one, the government overreach, and secondly, not having control over your own funds and your own cash are very, very sinister. So continue, please. That's just really quite, I think, a great example of what you're talking about in relation to the overreach. But how would you respond if I said that that couldn't happen here?
Well, great question, Dennis. And again, like we got to recognize in Australia, we are part of the Commonwealth. Fundamentally, most people don't even know who the Governor General of Australia really is, or what the Governor General's role actually is within Australia. And for those who don't know, his role is to communicate, be the point of contact. He's actually above the government, and he's the point of contact to the, in the past would have been the Queen, but now is the King of the United Kingdom, of which the Commonwealth countries, particularly Canada and Australia, are a part of. And so we can be assured that Australia, part of this Commonwealth system, just like Canada, could potentially happen within this country. Now, going back to what you mentioned around the concerns that we have and we could explore in a cashless society, is that ultimately when we agree and voluntarily with our will hand over consensually access to all of our financial information and data, such as how much we spend, where we spend it, what we're doing, then we become subject to those entities surveying and observing and watching every single transaction. And then you might say, well, I have nothing to hide. Privacy, that's okay for me because I literally have nothing to hide. And I would say for you then, yes, that's well and good. However, what if those organizations and those entities that have full surveillance of every single transaction that you make suddenly say that you are not allowed to leave your city? Or if you do, then we will take funds from you. You are not allowed to leave your house. And if you do, we'll take funds from you. You're not allowed to go outside for more than an hour. Then we will take funds from you to zero. And you might say, that's crazy. That would never happen in Australia. Well, we actually just experienced that in the last couple of years with the intense lockdowns, particularly in the southern states of Australia and Melbourne. So we can already start to see that if there was this control and surveillance and full kind of agreement towards a cashless society, then we would be in a position where we would be like pawns on a chessboard and be able to be manipulated and moved based on our situation with our banks.
It's quite incredible, isn't it? And there's so many things there. I think that I want to point out just because it's easy just to put them in a sentence, but they really that bears focusing on them. You're right. The people were physically locked up in a building in Melbourne and couldn't even go to exercise their dogs or go for walks. They had charges against them for going outside of their building. This is in Australia. This is not China. And incidentally, I saw a very small report about a massive payout to the residents of that apartment building for being locked up unjustly. But what really jumps out to me, Shay, is could it be, I'll break this into a two-part kind of observation and question. Do you think, one, it's possible for people like you and me for crimes to be, I guess, leveled at us and charges to be leveled at you and me for historic wrongthink? And secondly, while we might have this idea that this surveillance, these cameras, and this structure is put in for our safety and for I guess to help society in general, what if all of a sudden now I don't believe there's more than two genders. I think there are only two genders. And in the future, if me saying that gets my money cancelled because everything is getting surveilled, or if that becomes an imprisonable offense and I get busted on my phone, or I don't know, with all these cameras and the technology around for actually thinking the wrong thing, do you think it's possible in Australia that people can go to jail for almost these in this Orwellian situation?
Well, look, Dennis, they're really great questions that you bring to the table here, and something that I want to touch on. I think we could probably go into this more in depth in the next segment. However, before we get to that point, I just wanted to highlight that I've been very intentional with my words to realize that we actually have the power as people. And before I go into answer your questions, I just want to highlight this point and emphasize the fact that we must, as the people, volunteer and consent to signing up for this system. So although we have great concerns that this is a possibility for our trajectory and our path and our human evolution, it is not fully in place yet. Now, that's why Dennis and I are so motivated and inspired to have these conversations and raise the awareness of what's really going on in the world, and ultimately to give the power back to the people. I just wanted to focus and highlight on that emphasis. And I think maybe in the second segment here, Dennis, we can start to dive into a little bit more on the question you just raised.
Welcome back to Awakening in Health, and you are listening to Dennis O'Connor. I'm having a very interesting chat with Shay Ryan Douglas, who is a movie producer in his own right and hosts and actually is the creator of a platform called Earth Heroes TV. And I suggest that people check that out. There's some fantastic information there. But we're talking about another release called The Great Awakening, and how I guess it's trying to shake people from the slumber, really, to see some of the draconian things that are going on around the planet, and not just around the planet, but outside our front door. So we're having the potential to have all our freedoms and our rights severely stripped back from us, and not many people are seeing what that's looking like or how that is looking. So Shay, we left it off with this very sinister movement towards surveilling everything. And the point that I think is really important to make is where I live here in Queensland, is in Cairns. It is per capita the most surveilled place in Australia. We have more cameras here on street corners than any other place per member of the population, and our crime is at the highest it's ever been. So these cameras are not there for us. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question. And at first glance, we can see these cameras and speed cameras and, these towers going up. And ultimately, we're going to be convinced, they're going to try and convince us and persuade us that all of this surveillance and all of this cashless society and all of these digital health identities is going to be for your benefit. Going to make it more convenient. It's going to make you more safe. It's going to give you more security, and it's going to give you more access to more goods that you need delivered to your door. Okay, that sounds wonderful. Now we have to just look at the alternative. If we are a law-abiding citizen, then you might question, well, do we really need this layer of surveillance and digital infrastructure? And at what cost? So I want to just drop a very valuable resource for listeners right now. If you have a pen and paper or you have your iPhone available, go to a website called the World Economic Forum. And this organization is not a government organization, but in fact, a private enterprise. So when you realize, and this is a big feature in the film that we're talking about, The Great Awakening, which is why I bring it up in this discussion, is that the World Economic Forum is a private organization that is aimed to centralize the economy and power and control and financial resources to a small number of people, okay? And you might say, well, that's all just a conspiracy, that there is a small elite family that control the world. However, when you start to open your eyes and realize that they are not hiding this information, in fact, that they have it in public plain sight for all of us to research for ourselves. Again, it's the WEF, World Economic Forum that aim to bring all the world's resources and finances into a centralized system. And they are working with, or conspiring, meaning coming together with, some of the other wealthiest industries, private enterprises around the world, including the World Health Organization, the IMF, the International Monetary Foundation, and all of these other three-letter organizations that are non-elected. Remember, there's no one that has put these people in place, but they're working with these centralized banking systems. And it brings us back to this point, which the film highlights, is, are we truly in Australia living in a democratic government world? And we start to open the door to a whole new reality.
Yeah, I'd love to. Something I really like to do is try and take that devil's advocate position and challenge people who I'm talking to. But when I'm chatting to you, I was looking at the World Economic Forum, 10 years ago, and I can validate what you're saying. That you leave me in a position to be able to challenge nothing. To my mind, you're actually downplaying the sinisterness of the system. And one of the things that struck me when I went onto that platform, and I actually get the emails from them to keep an eye on the propaganda that they're sending out, is the vastness of their scope, of how big this project is, of how big the website is. I think if it was just me, it would take me years to click on every tab in the World Economic Forum website. It is absolutely immense, and it has information relating to just about every single country in the world. Also, I want to harper on the points that people, either directly or indirectly, are getting funded by this massive, massive group that is not sitting in Australia. And we had some horrendous things happen in Melbourne recently, especially with the lockdowns. And I laughed because I put a post on my Twitter account that Melbourne was voted the third best city in the world. And again, we can see why that happens. If you are on the payroll of something like the World Economic Forum, you're going to get the kudos of the reports and the different kind of surveys, I guess, that they run. So I'm going to hit you with another question here, Shay. Who is controlling Australia? Are we in a democracy? Are our politicians, our elected councillors, are they doing, I guess, our will, our bidding like they should, or is there something more going on? And how does that relate back to this movie, this film, The Great Awakening?
It's a great question, Dennis. And I mean, this kind of answer is really multifaceted, and it deserves the time and the energy and the effort to really unpack this situation. And there's a lot going on. And one of the WEF's kind of slogans and marketing pitches that they have been putting in place for the 2030 agenda, which is coming up very fast, quicker than we can probably imagine, is that we, the people, will own nothing and be happy. Now, when we just break that down, I've had the privilege of growing up in far north Queensland and being in proximity with local Indigenous people. And what they have really taught me is the power and the benefit of localized, decentralized community groups being self-sufficient, self-regulating, and resolving their own inner conflicts. Now, when we look at these larger systems like the World Economic Forum, you may say that there is a benefit to, we have global problems that need global solutions. Okay. That is an alternative. However, I'm a huge advocate for particularly localized communities to have decentralized autonomy, meaning that we have the power to resolve our own problems. And when we start to agree to these larger globalist agendas, then all we are doing is giving all of our power and our autonomy and our sufficiency and becoming dependent on an external source to solve all of our issues and problems. Now, we've got a question. Why are, in Australia, particularly bringing it back to health, why are the suicide rates so high? because the dependency on these larger global agendas really don't focus on the individual, the local communities. And so what ends up happening is that we end up going through this deep cycle of suffering because everyone is expecting and blaming and has this huge expectation that someone else is going to take care of everything for them. When we are seeing in real time right now the evidence that that does not work at all in human systems. And so this is, I think, important to bring back the power to the people, where we can, in localized, decentralized systems and communities, actually work towards more self-regulation, self-sufficiency, and self-autonomy to resolve all the inner conflicts within our local regions.
Yeah, it's all quite interesting. And one of the other things that really jumps out at me recently in the last few years is just this, I would describe it as a full-on attack on the family unit. The fact that the teachers can be parents, the fact that teachers can decide when your child learns about sexuality, for example, the fact that the curriculums that are in places like Scotland, England, and some places in Australia, even places in America, where we have 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, 7-year-olds being taught how to masturbate. I'm going to be quite blunt, and this has actually happened. People are being, young children are being exposed to these ideas. They're being exposed to the idea that they can be anything they want from a sexual point of view at any age they want. And that, with children, I used to be, I wanted to be a dinosaur when I'm 6 or 7. I wanted to be, I don't know, a pirate or an action man when I was 12 or 10, 11, 12. So to be messing around with ideas in relation to sexuality for children at such an early age, I feel is absolutely horrific. And not only that, but it seems to be that there is a hub where all these ideas are springing from. And one of the places that I see that springing from is agendas that are related either directly or indirectly to the World Economic Forum. And if you pull it back further, there seems to be an interesting overlap with Marxism and a Marxist agenda in order to take over societies by destroying the very fabric of society. We're going to just have another quick break here. And I am talking to Shay Ryan Douglas about a new movie called The Great Awakening. And I guess the information that carries in relation to the future of society in general. It's a very incredible show so far. I'm talking to Shay Ryan Douglas of Earth Heroes TV. I'm discussing a movie called The Great Awakening, which really is opening a can of worms in relation to this very cynical and tyrannical move towards entities in Europe that appear to be really pulling some very scary strings in relation to how our futures are going to be looking. We're going to have, we've probably got about another, I know you've got a little bit of a time limit there, Shay, so we might kind of close off, but I think our decision was to actually have kind of part 2 of this interview on both our platforms privately, because we probably want to take it down an area that might be otherwise censored. So if people can actually reach me at dennis@awakeninginhealth.com via email, and I can also direct you towards Shay's media. But yeah, just back to, I guess, to kind of close off with why it's important for people to get activated, get up and running, to actually look at this movie. Does it carry merit even? What would really prompt you for people to take action?
Yeah, look, Dennis, it's been a great conversation, and I'm excited to have more of these chats. And another great question. And you mentioned at the opening of this segment, this is very scary. We should be afraid. Well, I actually want to flick the switch and take a 180-degree turn on that, because ultimately the powers that be, the people who are working towards a global centralized system of control and governance, that's what they want us to feel and think. When I think becoming aware and having the information available can be extremely empowering, because suddenly we know, what cards they're holding in their hand and what cards they're starting to play. And if we have that awareness of what we're up against and what cards they have in their back pocket and what they're going to try and play, then suddenly we're not, there's no reason to be afraid, because there's nothing that is unknown and there's nothing that is uncertain. And in fact, it can give us the tools to be prepared and actually be ahead of the curve. And when these challenges come up and they arise, then we know instantly that this was always coming. In fact, it has already played out, and we can choose with discernment a rightful path for our future as a human species and a human family on a local community level. So I think we've really got to utilize this information and dissect it wisely, become aware of it, but not allow it to ultimately take control of us through the manipulations of our emotions, where we get so riled up and so confused and so uncertain, we don't know what direction to take for our lives. And so I think this is really important, this conversation that we're having. I want to invite more people to have these types of conversations and work towards a future that ultimately brings more people into the picture for better health, for a thriving life, for more equality, for decentralizations, and the power, the control, the decision-making process back to the people on the ground, including you and me.
So really, they want us to be afraid. So, and what you're saying is we collectively should refuse to be acting out of fear. And I think what I'm also hearing you say is that we should be aware of these things. We should be aware of this knowledge in order to, I guess, make decisions from a better kind of perspective. So then, just to throw that back at you again, why would you be considered as a resource, or why even would people want to look at this movie that could be far right, for example, or could be a conspiracy movie?
Yeah, look, Dennis, another great question, and ultimately, I am going to say that I actually don't believe anything that I say or believe me, and encourage every individual to reclaim their own sovereignty, reclaim their own power, and make your own discerning decision, and explore for yourself with curiosity the path that ultimately you feel is going to serve you and your family the most. And what I've realized in going down this journey and going down the rabbit hole, you might say, is that sometimes, yes, ignorance is bliss, because it can be extremely confronting to realize the amount of deception, the amount of manipulation, the extreme amount of coercion that has taken place in this reality. And ultimately, that means I have to come to grips with the extreme amounts of betrayal that I have been subject to. And what does that mean, to be betrayed? And this is in the psyche of the human mind, the depth of our own hellish experience. So I have to comprehend, and then comprehend this level of betrayal. And now if we just look at that as an element, well, you can't betray me unless I trust you. If I put all my trust into you that you have my best interest at heart, and then suddenly you go against what you say you will, that is betrayal. And that is a hard place to come to. And it's very difficult for anyone, to have a sense of compassion and empathy and love, which is ultimately going to transform that psyche and that emotion of betrayal and that feeling, particularly towards that person or that entity or that experience that had happened. And that is the place that we need to get to as a human civilization, which ultimately transcends all of the wrongdoing, all of the harmful effects. And it may seem like a simple solution that I'm suggesting and a little bit aloof. However, this is an internal game. This goes deeper than the surface level conversation. And then that becomes, again, even more empowering for us as individuals to recognize that ultimately the most powerful technology that exists in the world, even with the rise of artificial intelligence and this digital systems that are coming into place is the human level experience of you and I who are functioning in this world to not only create change, but be a part of this changing world, but ultimately have the power to direct it in a way that is going to serve our community, serve each other in a beautiful way. So
nicely rounded up, Shay. And again, that really fits back into why I do what I do, which is in order to function from that much better place of power, we have to be on top of our health. But knowing that there's forces in our community that are trying to take those energies and those strengths away from us is very important, because a sick and disempowered population is a population that's easier to control. An ignorant population is a population who is even unaware that they are having tyranny put upon them, that they are having in slavery put on their shoulders. So they're not going to fight back in any way, shape, or form. And to be honest with you, Shay, to a certain extent, maybe I was more comfortable in the old world. And sometimes I reflect back on that little part of the Matrix where the guy gets back into the system. Could I do that? Quite possibly. But what really just jumps out for me is the fact that I've got children now. I may have grandchildren. I know that you have that possibility of being a father yourself in the future. So really, it's not just about us doing these things for ourselves. Is it? We have a future generation or generations that I think we have to be desperately fighting for.
I would absolutely agree with you there, Dennis. And that is one of my main primary motivations, is for the next generation of humanity to come through. Particularly, I am now an uncle to a third child, so I'm really, really proud and really grateful, and one day hope to have my own children. And so there's nothing more inspiring than these younglings coming of age, and that gives me the spark of life to be able to go out into the world and really raise the bar of what's possible in our human evolution. Because at this time there is multiple layers of uncertainty that are arising on a very simple level. One that affects many of us is that interest rate rise in the financial space. It's the uncertainty of a cashless society. It's the unknown of what's coming around the corner in a tyrannical, globalized system. And so when we remember, and this was one of the benefits that I've seen over the last 3 years in these terrible lockdown situations, is that it's really led me to sit back and contemplate and reflect on what's really important, what's really valuable. And you can't take away that human connection with family and friends and your most cherished loved ones that we all have as a primary point of commonality and connection that we must all not only remember, but also prioritize in our lives. It's too often that people leave this life, they leave this earth, and on their deathbed, I spoke to this a bit with a friend who does this for a living, and she said that too many people leave with regrets, saying that they wish they hadn't worked as much, they wish they had to spend more time with their friends and their family and their children and they're those who they love the most. And it's easy to get caught up and get lost in this world, wishing that we want to do this and we want to achieve that, but ultimately it brings us back to that question: is what's really important for us in this life.
What a beautiful way to leave it, Shay. I'm aware that you have another appointment that's pressing, so I'm going to wrap up. Shay, you can be found at Earth Heroes TV. People can contact me, Dennis, at awakeninginhealth.com. And thank you so much, mate, for an absolutely brilliant discussion and conversation. I'm privileged to call you a mate. And thank you, everyone else out there listening to Awakening in Health. And I hope you have a fantastic week ahead.